You make a bad buy on top of a bad buy on top of a bad buy. You start to compound it. All of a sudden, you're buying yourself a lot of liability.
Bob, thanks for meeting.
Hey, Sid, good to see you.
Great, great. So, we're going to dive a little bit on the hat that you've wore for more than 15 years, which is the wine buyer hat. I really want to bring value for other wine buyers here, and there is no better person than you. I mean, I really admire what you do, and I just want to know, how that role, really, what that includes, and how people can perform better at that role. So why don't you please tell me more about your experience and what all things you've done and where all you work, please?
So actually, Sid, I've been in buyer roles for more than 30 years.
Wow.
And that covers independent. I own my own store for a lot of years. Old school model, brick and mortar, dinosaur model of knowing every person that comes in the door, hand selling, all of that. I did that for 16 years. And after that, I went into the corporate side, and I've spent time with large companies, Walmart, Southeastern Grocers, Kohl's, which is a very large retailer in Australia, and BevMo on the West Coast as well. So I've worked in independent retail, in the club channel, in grocery, in specialty retail, and then also some in the international side as well.
Fantastic. And the names are like Sam's Club, right? You were there. You were there at BevMo. You were there at Kohl's, you said. So let's start with just a difference between working in a independent, which you've done at the beginning of your career, versus just going in a corporate role. What sort of differences you saw?
The difference is tremendous. When you're an independent retailer, everything about making that business operate falls on you and maybe a small staff of people. So everything is very, very hands-on. Every detail, whether it's you're buying wine, the way the store is laid out, your pricing policy, your interaction in terms of marketing and all of that. So you're responsible for everything from A to Z. For me, I think that was really a good learning ground because it gave me a perspective of every aspect of the business. And in terms of learning, that was tremendous. And prior to owning a store for 16 years, I worked in a retail store, a nice wine shop, for about 5 years. So that was really a bit of a training ground. That led me into owning my own store. Going into the corporate world, entirely different gig. At that point, you have a distance from the people who are actually buying the wine, buying the product. You're sitting in an office and you've got a spreadsheet in front of you. You've got a P&L. And typically for buyers in that type of role, you're going to have objectives, targets to hit in terms of profits, in terms of sales, market share. The numbers can vary based on whatever the company prioritizes. But essentially, you've got numbers to hit.
Yep.
And
are those numbers like yearly, quarterly, usually? What kind of objectives, are there, and the time zones we're looking at?
It rolls up to whatever the fiscal year may be. But within that fiscal year, the company is going to break it down according to quarters, or it could be periods. You might, what very common was having 13 4-week periods.
Okay.
And each one of those periods, you would have some sort of planning in terms of, here's how we're going to hit our numbers.
All right.
And, it may be a natural ebb and flow of traffic. You get into Q4, you get a lift, people are buying a lot more. There's seasonality with some holidays like Easter or Valentine's Day, that sort of thing. So you laid out your plan based on what was happening in each one of those periods.
What are that numbers? Like approximately 20% every year is a minimum requirement at sort of a corporate level for top line, and 20% profits?
There is no hard and fast rule on this.
Okay.
So if you have a business that is relatively young, or if it's coming out of some sort of turnaround, oftentimes that business is at kind of a lower point.
Okay.
The growth potential for the next year or two typically is going to be quite good if you play
So
your
like for
cards
a new
right.
store, if there's a new location, it's very different versus you stepping into some old location of Sam's Club, for example.
Yeah, if you have a business that's mature, it's going to be harder to get
So let me rephrase.
double-digit growth.
Your job, who do you report to? Let's start there. Who would you report to when you were a corporate buyer of Sam's?
Generally, what will happen in each of the corporate environments is you will have someone who oversees a larger department.
Okay.
Okay, so in a place like Sam's, it may be an individual who oversees a lot of the consumables.
Okay.
In a grocery store, there's typically going to be someone who is, call it a director, a VP, whatever term they use. But it might be someone who oversees center store. Here's another individual
like
that
food,
oversees
beauty, beverages, whatever, that kind of group.
Yeah.
Example. And then you would say, all right, John, here's my report for this 90 days. Sales up 20%, profits, contribution is 28%. I think we are on track. And then you just review every.
In a sense,
what was the pressure?
In a sense,
what was?
It's crazy. It's crazy because if you're hitting your numbers as the year progresses, okay, now you're feeling some of that pressure is laying off. If you're not, well, then the pressure just compounds as you go down the road because again, you're tasked to hit a specific target. The other things that are looked at is, obviously you're looking at sales and profit margin.
Yes.
Market share is oftentimes a big consideration.
Meaning number of consumers.
Yeah,
Is that defined as market share?
If you're a large retailer, you're working for a grocery chain, let's say, what percentage of the total market do you capture?
Wow.
So, if you're 2% of the market, your goal may be for the next year to grow that to 2.2%.
So you're talking nationally now, or regionally?
It depends. It depends on what the business is. If it's a national business, you look at the national number. If it's regional,
you look at the regional.
For instance, at
data.
Southeast Grocers, it was all based on the southeast part of the U.S. So market share oftentimes will be a conversation. The other thing that comes up oftentimes is turns. Turns.
Okay, what is that?
So, for instance, if you had $1 million in inventory.
Oh, turnout.
And you turn that inventory 4 times a year.
Got it.
Okay, that's 4 turns. Within a grocery store and within many very, very large retail stores, you're looking at maybe 4 or 5 turns a year of the inventory.
Okay.
Now, as an independent retailer, when I had my own store, I was about 10 to 12 times a year.
That's good.
So, that's a really quick, efficient turn.
Yeah.
And with that, the other part you look at is, well, okay, if I'm turning my inventory 4 times a year, you keep your eye on the inventory that is not moving.
Yep.
Okay, because that provides 2 potential liabilities. One is it's unproductive money. It's taking space on a shelf, on an end cap, wherever. That's unproductive. And eventually, it's going to be distressed goods. No one wants to be selling Italian Pinot Grigio that's 4 years old. So managing that is also very important. So there's a lot of aspects that are
How do you
moving.
manage dead inventory or slow-moving products? What were the things you did?
Well, before it becomes distressed goods, you look at putting it on some sort of promotion to blow it out. In some cases, and in many places in the U.S., scan money is used. You may go back to a supplier and say, look, I really need help moving this item out. They may provide some money per unit sold, and that in turn helps you to fund the promotion. So it helps to keep you whole in terms of your margins, And that supplier then plays a role of supporting you, and then in turn you may say, look, when I blow this out, I'll bring another new item in, that'll be yours.
Got it. So most of the time I'm assuming that is part of the thing that supplier needs to sign on when they're signing or dealing with big change. Like it's a requirement, like if things don't move, I expect you to help me out and so on, like, or...
Oftentimes, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, oftentimes the answer to that is yes. It's tough to speak in really broad terms like this because there always are going to be exceptions.
Got it, yeah.
The other aspect that I looked at that was a massive driver was developing private label.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look around the world, private label is very significant in some places. You go into the UK, you go into a Tesco, Sainsbury, over half of what they sell is their own brand. Mm-hmm. Go into a Marks and Spencer, it's almost everything. Okay, so here in the US, private label has lagged in terms of development. The last few years, it's really taken off. Mm-hmm. And back when I first got into the business, this is back like in the Reagan administration, mm-hmm. so this is a long time ago. Private label was generally the opening price point. It was sold based on price, and it was the cheap entry point into the market.
Yeah.
Okay, that's
changed. Yeah.
That's changed radically now. Mm-hmm. You'll find private label at all different price points. You can find private label Barolo and Champagne and all kinds
I've heard
of
Costco has nice 18-year whiskey, which is like hot cakes, right? As well.
So I mean, Costco's vodka, that's been a rock star for years. So there's plenty of examples out there where it works.
Yeah.
And now there's a lot of companies that are set up specifically to create private label.
So back to that KPIs, let's say the indicators, right? Which you said market share, turnout, profit margin contributor, and so let's say there is a Yellowtail, which can be like for foot traffic, and then there is private label for margins, and then there is this brand for that. So when you're buying, is there like a category which you assign your portfolio and design it that this is meant for this is meant for this, and then you measure based on that particular that this was meant for a foot traffic, but it's not doing, so bye-bye? Or how does that work?
To a large extent, yes. You start to segment out your assortment.
Okay.
And you have items that are, I always call these hard brands. These are the brands that are everywhere. You use the Yellowtail example, but it could be that. It could be, Sutter Home, Franzia, that whatever. The brands you find everywhere.
Correct.
Those generally are, to a large degree, almost treated like commodities. Mm-hmm. Okay, they're sold on price. You run a promotion. You're $1 less than the guy down the street. You get a bump in sales. As soon as that promotion is done, that consumer then is shifting to whatever else is on promotion next.
How did you, turn Yellowtail to a private label, let's say, which was more profit contribution?
Okay, so if you had something like Yellowtail, okay, that was a big driver and it was like a commodity type of item. If you created a comparable product, comparable price point, that wine is actually spec'd out based on Yellowtail.
Correct.
So what I would do is, let's say it's Yellowtail Chardonnay, I'm going to vet out a number of potential business partners. These are wineries that can have the ability to produce that type of wine in the volumes that are needed, and they provide cost stability.
Got it.
The worst thing you want to do is get behind something and push it, and all of a sudden next year your COGS go up 20% and you're not competitive.
Yeah.
So there was a vetting process that played out. And then once you've determined that you have that specific item that can compete against something like Yellowtail, then there was a package design. Okay, that package design would generally be a few different concepts. You take a focus group, you run it by these people and say, what's your reaction to this? So you're getting some sort of feedback that's real. And so, if you had an item, let's say the bulk of the business was a 25 to 40-year-old female shopper, that's what you'd want in your focus group as well. So you're trying to get some data that's relevant so you can make the change from that hard brand to your soft brand or a private label.
And in the store placements, tactics, what did you use? Like you just put that particular private label next to Yellowtail and hoped for the best, and also the store staff for hand selling, or what were the tactics behind pushing that alternative?
So yeah, lots of tactics on this. One is it would be positioned on the shelf next to it with some sort of shelf talker or some sort of call out that would help bring attention to it. You can get a third party review, some sort of review that's good. That always helps. It may be something that you're running on promotion on a regular cadence. It has a spot on an end cap, floor stacks, that sort of thing. You know, if you're into using, in-store tasting events, you really feature those items. You play them up like you own them, which you do. And, they need the full brand building exercise. So, you think of marketing, what's the P's? What is it? Product placement, promotion,
packaging, and all that.
Yeah. So, it's not rocket science, but you tick all those boxes, and then you position yourself in a way where odds are you're going to have success because you've done your due diligence. And some things go wrong. You never know.
Yeah. What can go wrong, in the task, where you think I could have done this better? I mean, you absolutely know this could have been done better. Like, what are the things that buyers can not do to,
I think one thing that is a recipe for disaster if you're buying based on your own preference, okay, because you're not the target audience.
But most would not have the resources sometimes, to listen to the end consumers, or how it's just going to be on the gut end of the day. How can they narrow that down? How can they listen?
But there's all sorts of trade data. I mean, you can take a look at, Nielsen numbers and get that sort of data. You can see what's trending up. You look at those items that are trending up, and sometimes you'll find a commonality there where, here's a particular style or a particular place of origin that's really working well. Yeah. So, you're trying to eliminate the risk factor as much as possible. So if you're thinking through all those pieces, and then at the end you do have some sort of focus group, okay, you've done all your due diligence, at some point you take a leap of faith, but you've done your homework.
What other things you think they commonly make mistakes or should not do?
Well, as I mentioned, buying to your own preference is really a bad recipe. You've got to think from the perspective of what that customer is looking for. And the other is, if you're looking at wines from various regions, let's say you're talking, it's a Napa Valley Cabernet, or it's a Barbaresco from Piemonte. What I've always tried to do is to focus on those wines that are true to that place of origin. So this way, anyone who's coming in and shopping your assortment, they pick something up. They may not know what it is, but it's a good representation of the place that it's from. Yeah. So, that may sound like an overly...
No, I understand. They're not surprised. The typicity has to be there, so that way the store credibility is not at place. Because
100%.
It's like New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc should absolutely taste like New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc, at least, so they know you recommended or placed the right thing, I believe.
Exactly. Yeah. You don't want someone to come in and spend $20 on something and think, this is not what I expected at all. Yeah. Okay, that's generally going to be a bad experience.
Let's go on other tactical stuff like staff training, right? You have this new brand. What is that 20-minute session you would call all your wine reps, in the store and talk about, like, this is how you talk about this product and what to do and what not? How can they improve?
Yeah, so look, every business has their own approach to how they roll out new items. Some of them it may be, you may have some sort of email blast that goes out and here's the story. Okay. Some actually have training sessions where you need to read about the wine, you check a box, you've actually
There's a Q&A, you ask questions and you see whether the person's knowledgeable or not.
That's actually the best that I've seen when that sort of thing happens. It's pretty rare. And if you think about it in the context of, if you're in a club store or in a grocery store, for instance, there's tens of thousands of items there. Yeah. and you roll out 5 new wines. I mean, it amounts to about 2 grains of sand on the beach in the big picture.
Do you guys do like something like, okay guys, this week we go to sell more wine, is there like real salesy approach to that?
In some cases, yes.
Okay.
In some cases, but again, it's all specific to the company.
To the company. So
yeah.
Maybe I'm incorrect, but till my observations, I love Total Wine. The way they hand sell. Like that's one of the best stores I've seen where like service, sales, everything just falls in place very nicely. So what is, based on your experiences, which stores did or which exact things you think were so good, you think this absolutely, because of this, sales went up?
Well, I think the Total model is I think you're spot on. I mean, they do a great job. There's specific training for the people that work there. Most of their stores actually have a room designated for learning, for tasting. So, I mean, they've owned that. And I think part of the reason for that is you have a massive selection of wine.
Yeah.
And you have a lot of wines there that are exclusive to them.
Correct.
So, feeding that information stream is critically important there, because they're selling what I would call is a lot of soft brands.
Yeah.
Okay, they're not out there and marketed broadly, like
brands that need education or a little storytelling, right?
Right, exactly. And the other piece that I've always found with wine, wine is one of those things, there's a strong emotive link. People have traveled to places, like soon I'm taking a trip to Spain. Okay, you go there, you have a nice experience, you have an emotive link to that place. Okay, it's different. It's not the same if you're buying, toilet paper or maybe cat food. I don't know, maybe people are emotional about that. But wine is something that usually it's associated with a good experience. And if you've been to some of these places where wines are produced, there's a familiarity and comfort with it. And oftentimes people will go back to those again and again.
Yeah.
So the emotive link is really
important.
Really, it's really important.
So that brings me back to the person who has some background and studied and things of that nature. How did Master of Wine change when you knocked door of Sam's or Applied or BevMo or versus someone who doesn't have that? Do you get preferential? Okay, Bob, you were first, or?
I'll tell you, passing the Master of Wine, I passed in 2002. I sold my business in 2002, so that's when I made the change. That meant everything. I mean, it opened up a lot of doors. It gave instant credibility. It helped in ways that I can't even express, and it still does to this day.
And it helped in functioning your role as well in the business, I believe.
It absolutely.
More than the career, right? Like performing better at your job?
I think both, because going through the MW program, it's very challenging, and it really puts you through the ringer. It forces you to think of things in ways that maybe you hadn't before, and understand that solutions are not always cookie cutter. There's different ways that you can have a successful outcome, and I think in that regard, it gave me much more perspective in thinking laterally, if that's the correct term. So it helped in that regard in terms of everyday business approach. The other thing is, though, it did provide instant credibility with the supplier world, and you're meeting with people for a first time. Oh, this guy's an MW, and okay, fine. You can use that to your advantage. But there's all kinds of education programs out there now. The WSET and loads of others. Having some sort of credential, I think, is a plus.
What's your favorite work execution that you can remember that this was pulled off and you were very proud of it and you tactically, strategically did it? Walk me over a little detail, please.
I think probably my time working for Southeastern Grocers.
Okay.
When I went there, the company was just a few years from coming out of bankruptcy, and they were trying to reinvent themselves. And I had a fantastic manager there, and he really gave me free run to do whatever I felt was needed to get the business on the right path. But what I discovered very early on was there was a massive amount of dead inventory. So you had a small core of items that turned really well, and you had a lot of other items that just were not productive. Well, that's a lot of money sitting on a shelf. And if you're in a grocery store, for instance, the largest inventory investment in a grocery store generally is going to be beverage alcohol. It's right up there. Pharmacy is going to be very high, and fresh meat. In terms of dollars per square foot,
Understood, yeah.
it's typically the pharmacy, because again, very compact.
Got it.
But beverage alcohol is a massive investment, and managing that inventory was something that I really focused on. So it was, let's eliminate the dead wood, let's get rid of this, and we did it in a very systematic way over a long period of time. It's not like we could mark everything down and just blow it out, because you crater your numbers if you did that. So it was done in a very staged sort of approach. And then it was a matter of, let's fill these gaps with items that are relevant to the customers today. So let's look at the data. The other thing I did at that point was the stores were clustered. So there were certain demographics that were common among certain stores. You might have a more affluent area. You might have areas that have more retirees or whatever it may be. Their buying patterns had some common element, and you could group those together.
Interesting, yeah.
So the assortment for...
I always thought about cheese and like the products, but never the people can be different areas as well. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I mean, look, you're not going to load up a store that is kind of a grab-and-go, quick, convenient sort of outlet.
Yeah.
You're not going to load that up.
So you studied that, and then you reverse engineered the merchandise.
Absolutely. And because my thought was what that provided is a much higher degree of assurance that we wouldn't fall back into having a lot of dead inventory. We've got the right items in the right store. And, granted, this is painting with kind of a broad brush. It's not like you can be down to every specific item. But directionally speaking, it made a huge difference in the business.
On challenges of the buyer, one of the things is the buying process, right? Or the buying philosophy. One thing you said was, don't be personal, you buy according to your preferences. But if there was a 10-point checklist that do this 10 things, as if you were hiring some young buyer, you would just coach and tell, okay, stick to the plan. This is what you do. What those 10 things would look like,
You want 10 things from me?
Yeah, for my suppliers.
Okay. I don't know if I can rattle off 10, but in terms of new buyers that are coming into a role, a few things that I would look at. One is look at what's worked historically. It's not like everything needs to be reinvented. Okay, so if you have, and you should have, some sales history, you can track what has worked over a period of a number of years.
Understood.
Ideally. You're looking at price points, you're looking at styles, you're looking at all of these components that make wines different from one another. Well, there's groupings of that as well.
Yes.
So finding that is I'd say a good starting point, because that's going to form the basis of your business. Okay? Then what I would look at is take a look at what the growth segments are. And what I've always done in the past, I think of the 30 plus years, for me what I found was oftentimes what was happening in the UK was a couple years later you were going to find it here in the States.
I've noticed that, yeah.
And a couple years after that you're going to find it in Australia. Okay? So and I'll give you loads of examples of that. I think of years ago when Moscato had its day in the sun. Okay, you saw that in the UK before you saw it here in the States. The same thing would be true of Melbeck.
Yeah.
Okay, you think of rosé.
And I have one example, low alcohol Bev. Same thing, UK first, and now it's going to come here.
Absolutely, yeah.
No alcohol, low alcohol.
Rosé is another one.
Yeah.
You think. I've been around long enough in this business. I can remember when rosé had its day in the sun almost 40 years ago.
Yep.
And then, White Zinfandel came on the scene and kind of dumbed the whole category down, and it really kind of tainted what it was perceived at. Well, it's back again.
Yeah.
Okay, and again, it's different than what it was, but as a category,
Correct, yeah.
it's back. So I would take a look at what is like those niche categories that are small and showing great potential.
Yes.
So for me, one thing that I look at right now that I think it is going to be a really interesting niche is Cab Franc. Okay, so you look at Cab Franc, there is amazing Cab Franc coming out of Argentina
But
right
what
now.
else did you look at? How? What consumer side is telling you that that's picking up?
Well, you can find it. You can find it in some of the data, and you can also, in the work I do today, I'm talking to wine producers in Argentina, and all they're telling me is that the call on Cabernet Franc has exploded.
Got it.
So, it makes me think there's something there. It's kind of like when there's smoke,
Yeah.
there's some
when there was
fire.
Malbec movement, for example, you could see it. That demand is happening.
Yeah. And the examples that I'm trying, I think the wines are amazing, and I think there could be a really cool story there. So I would look at what are those developing niches. Another point that I think is really important is who you're partnering with.
Supplier?
Yes.
You mean? Okay.
Okay. So with that, look, you're going to have a handful of suppliers that are going to have a broad range of items. You're going to work with a Gallo or Delicato. People like this. They've got a broad portfolio. They're important to the core of your business. Okay, those are oftentimes SKUs that you need to kind of build the foundation. Partnering with suppliers that have some innovation, some things that are kind of cool and different. And again, it depends on the type of format you're in. But if you want to have something that really is trend correct and not just kind of stagnant, finding these suppliers that have items that are different. And in the wine industry has been notorious for being very slow on innovation.
Yeah.
That's really changed the last couple of years. Okay, it's not like, spirits are a lot more innovative than wine, but there's things happening with. You look at the explosion of can, for instance.
Even I think we're moving towards sustainability things as well.
Absolutely, you see a lot of movement too on much more premium box wines.
Yep.
And the other point you brought up
Yep.
is this eco-friendly piece. This is not some bullshit. There's substance to this. And looking at maybe not so much biodynamic, but certainly organic, vegan-friendly wines made with no enzymes. Some places maybe you're talking indigenous yeast. Wineries that are playing up the aspect of recycling, renewable resources, solar. All of these things are becoming more and more part of our daily life. So don't think that wine is somehow unique in that regard. It's something that people are valuing more in terms of their purchase of everyday consumer items. So it's just a natural fit with wine as well. So that would be another thing I would look at. The other is having a really vibrant, relevant private label program. Okay, so private label provides some really strong benefits. If you do this right, it's certainly a margin driver because you don't have competitors selling that same item. The consumer really doesn't know what the value of that item is, so you've got more leeway in terms of margin dollars there. Those margin dollars can often help if you've got dead inventory that you need to move out, so you're taking a smaller margin here, you're taking a larger margin, and then it all washes out. The other thing is, with private label, doing it right, it provides a different point of differentiation. You have something unique and different. Someone comes in, they have a good experience with it. You've got them. Okay, you're the only game in town that has it. It also can be a good leverage point against big suppliers. So if you have a viable options in private label, it may somewhat diminish the need for a lot of these hard brands. It puts you in a better position to say, look, You want me to work with this? I need something
that
more.
price. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It gives you something to play hardball with.
Got it.
Yeah.
And couple more points on how to be a better buyer. You gave great, things there.
Look, keep in mind, being a better buyer, all of it has to do with hitting numbers on a P&L.
Got it.
So,
what questions would you ask a brand, as a buyer when you're talking, let's say I'm a supplier and you're a buyer, what kind of things you would ask personally, if you were wearing, let's say, BevMo or any big chain buyer hat?
Yeah, if there's a few things that could be asked. If it's a new item that's being introduced, you may ask for an exclusive on it for a period of time.
Okay.
I will get behind this item, but in return, I'm looking for 90 days exclusive.
Got it.
Okay, so you've got this supplier that's out there, they're doing some advertising, they're showing the wine in trade shows, they're getting the word out there, they're doing their social media thing. Hey.
But you do ask them that, hey, I need a billboard outside BevMo that says now available in BevMo. Those kind of things happen?
That does, yeah, okay. That does happen. It does.
Okay.
In today's world, I would put more emphasis on social media.
Okay.
Okay.
Attention, basically. You do ask them to create attention for you guys.
Yeah.
Okay.
You want brand awareness.
But specifically, like now in Total Wine or BevMo or whatever it is, you are asking them for foot traffic, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. And in turn, look, you've got to understand from the supplier perspective, over and over what they're looking for is points of distribution. Okay. So for a brand to be successful, and I'm talking a brand that's made in significant volume,
correct,
it needs to be in a lot of places.
Got it.
Okay? And so you being on the buyer end, you've got some sort of leverage point on that.
Because you're giving them the places and they want that, like a lot of outlets, right?
Exactly. So for instance, when I was with Southeastern Grocer, at that time I think they had something like 500 or 600 stores. So if it's an item that is relevant for all clusters, to go to a supplier and say, look, I will give you this many points of distribution.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
Yes.
Okay, that's a lot.
It's a lot.
Now, if it's a smaller supplier and it's something that's more premium, maybe that wine's only relevant in 100 locations. But in the context of that supplier,
yeah,
that's still important.
Absolutely understood.
Yeah.
So exclusivity is one good thing to start off. Then more like rack programs or any other tactical?
Yeah, you might say, look, in order for me to get behind this, I'm going to need promotional funding 4 times a year.
Understood, okay.
And, then will you build out a calendar? And in every role that I've had as a buyer, or if I've had buyers that reported to me, you have a calendar laid out of, on this week, this is what you're going to promote.
Okay.
And you look at things in terms of having a product mix where you're kind of ticking all the boxes.
Yes.
You don't want it too narrowly focused. And you keep things in mind like seasonality.
Okay.
Okay, you're going into springtime. Look, that's the time to really hit rosé hard.
So it's really so much of an analytic job, more than...
That's all it is.
Right?
Yeah.
And that brings me to ask, personally, I wanted to always know this, like sometimes when I approach, or buyers for our competitions and all that, I've noticed some young person, pure finance background, nothing to do with wine, elaborate on that, I would say.
Yeah, maybe that's swinging the pendulum too far the other way. It's dangerous if you have too much data invested in what you're buying. Okay, it's not. The way I've always looked at things is when I'm in a buyer role, I think of it in terms of, if this were my money, would I be spending this? And if you really need to think about it and you think, God, I'm taking a risk on this that's unnecessary, well, probably shouldn't do it.
But what my point is, it's just 100% data technically, right? Like you just have to be so much non-emotional about things at the corporate level. You will be forced down for sure if you're not able to prove your boss that this brand will contribute this way with data instead of, I think this will do because it tastes amazing, you know?
Okay, so you're touching on a point that's really become a hot topic in the supplier world in recent years, and that is how many buyers are uber conservative and protective. Okay, they're very risk adverse because you take a bad buy. Okay, you can rebound from that typically. You make a bad buy on top of a bad buy on top of a bad buy. You start to compound it. All of a sudden, you're buying yourself a lot of liability.
Yeah.
Okay. I've always had maybe a bit more risk tolerance, but it's always with due diligence.
Yeah.
Okay. I've done my homework. I believe this will succeed for all of these reasons. And sometimes things don't, but typically if you're doing your homework, you've got the right price point, you've got the right packaging, the wine quality is right for the price. I mean, you're ticking all the things.
Yeah.
Usually you're going to be in a good place.
It's the discipline to stay by the books pretty much, you know, just do what has to be done. And
don't be making rogue purchases. You know, I mean, here's a person I really like, and I'm going to invest something in this. That's a recipe for disaster.
So give me one story about an actual interview. You know, let's say, what did Southeastern or BevMo ask you? What kind of questions? What kind of qualifications they were looking for their corporate buyer?
Okay, so I recall with Southeastern Grocers. Now at this point, I had been a master of wine. I think I started there in 2009, I think it was. Mm-hmm. So it was just after the recession. So here's a company that's on the rebound, and they're trying to build their business back up. I remember the person that I interviewed who was actually who I reported to. He said he had a lot of questions about how I approach everyday business. There was not a lot of conversation around wine, or we call it the product, or what we were selling.
Interesting.
It was more of how would you manage the business. And what he said to me afterwards was, he said, look, he said, you know, I know you're an MW, you're one of these wine geek people. I'm not concerned about your knowledge about wine itself. Look, this is a business, and you're one brick in the wall, and you know you need to be a solid brick. So how do you approach the business?
Okay.
And you know, it's a lot of what we've discussed. It's a lot of nuts and bolts of managing a P&L.
Managing people?
Of course, managing people, and understanding that you pull a lever, all kinds of things start to go into motion.
Yeah.
You know, so you run some sort of price promotion and you get a nice bump in sales. Okay, well, did that bump in sales actually provide more profit? More sales with less profits, not a good combination. You run a promotion, you've actually, maybe you've decreased the margin dollars a bit, you know, the margin percentage that is, but the overall margin dollars were a net gain. That's a win. Now keep in mind, next year, you need to anniversary that. So what are you going to do next year to continue that forward progress? So you're always thinking well in advance of, okay, these are things that worked for me in the past.
Yeah.
These are things that I'm seeing out in the marketplace that maybe I can do that I'm not.
Yeah.
And you know, if you happen to be at a trade show or somewhere where you're getting more of a global perspective, sometimes you can find something that's working in a different country. Think we could do that as well.
Got it.
So, I mean, it's being nimble and always having it clear in your head. You don't always have all the answers.
Yeah. Any other questions you remember, which can help people, you know, who are getting interviewed by some chain buyers?
Look, if you're being interviewed for those types of roles, having the ability to manage a P&L is going to be by far the most important thing. The next thing I would say is you're like an advocate for whatever category you're in. So, you know, oftentimes in these corporate settings, there's going to be sales meetings. There's going to be occasions where you're going to get up in front of a group of people. Some of these people may be interested in what you're doing. Some of them, they're really not. But telling the story that proves that you're relevant to the fuller business It's always important. You've got to be like that flag bearer that's always telling the story of,
True.
here's what we're doing. It's helping to drive a larger basket in our stores. I mean,
Got it.
but again, a lot of it's data driven.
Yeah.
But putting yourself out there and telling the story, yeah, it's important.
Fantastic. Anything else you would want to add as a final tip?
Look, I think the other thing is just you don't always know everything. And the wine business is very fluid. There's always things that are changing. You know, there's fads, things come and go. There's other things that are relatively stable. And being aware of all the moving pieces, it's always going to be a benefit to you.
Which were the good, sorry, one more popped because of this. Which were the 3 or 4 good magazines or newsletters you consumed to keep up in the loop, you know, for the global sort of, or even US, let's say?
Well, I mean, magazine, I've always been a big fan of Decanter. I've always liked it. I think it's fair, open-minded sort of wine journalism.
Okay.
So I think they do a very good job. I mean, something like even like Wine Business Monthly.
Yeah.
You know, because that gives you more of like a business approach versus the consumer approach.
What about the consumer side of things, data like Nielsen reports and those kind of things? Did you use to consume as well, or general?
Like crazy.
Like cheese sales are up, and then now let me play with cheese.
The Nielsen data or alike is really important.
Okay.
The only thing with that, though, it's a little bit like driving, looking in the rearview mirror.
It's
Okay?
happened now, yeah.
Yeah, it's happened. So if it's something that is shown like a big spike, and that spike now is starting to decrease, okay? Like you're...
Yeah, it's like, let's just not reorder this. It can help you eliminate the error.
Right, you're anticipating that
Yeah,
that's something, like you're seeing this now with seltzers.
That's a great thing to actually think about, yeah.
So
not to make sure you're not repeating that at the downturn.
And then to counter that is you may have other smaller categories that are just consistently ticking up.
Yeah.
And when you build out your assortment, typically you're looking for like a balanced assortment. Okay, so you've got a category that's growing. I have 5 SKUs dedicated to it. Maybe I should have 10. And then whatever is maybe a category that's contracting, or one that's showing a lot of slowdown in growth, that may be something where, okay, I'm going to take 5 SKUs that's going here, and I'm going to take it from this other category that is mature, or it's actually in decline.
One final question.
Yeah.
If you had $10,000 and holiday season's going and your boss said, all right, you know, 10,000 per store, you have the budget, Bob, you know, put that and invest in any promotion. You know, what would be the one thing that you would go for which gave you the highest ROI guaranteed? You've seen that's proven. Money's come back, you know.
Okay, so proven going in the
Proven 15
Q4.
years promotional #1 method.
Man, you're a tough guy, man. You're tough.
There must be something.
This is a bit of a cop-out. I'm going to give you 2 responses. Okay, if you're going into Q4, I mean, the most likely thing you'd go with is you'd say sparkling. Okay, but here's the downside to that. Within that category, you have, let's say you're talking specifically champagne. Your margins on things like Veuve Clicquot and Moet and things like that are generally going to be small, okay, because it's a very competitive, it's in a lot of places, it's used as a promotion. You're going to get return in terms of turns. I mean, that's going to be something that people are going to be buying. It's kind of a no-brainer, okay? Also, with us coming out of a year and a half of being in lockdown, I think this year, Q4, there's going to be a hell of a lot of sparkly bought because people are just going to think,
Celebrate
hey, we're getting back to some sort of normalcy and I'm going to be with friends. And it's going to be more celebratory than typical, I think. Okay.
So I was going at marketing wise, like would you invest and put floor displays to, like where would you make racks or a newspaper ad or a TV ad? Where would you spend the 10,000? Not on the product side.
Okay.
which marketing buckets would
tell
give
you what I would do right now. I would be hitting social media really hard. And look, if your customer base is younger, you know, you've got kind of the millennial group. I mean, there is social media that's very dialed into them. If it's maybe a little bit more of a mature clientele, then, you know, I mean, Facebook's still a beast. So something like that, I think would makes a lot of sense. With a millennial shopper, more and more, they're not looking for recommendations from some critic.
Do you get to decide this, where to spend money as a buyer for your things?
In some companies, yes.
Okay.
I mean, for instance, when I was with Kohl's in Australia, completely different department that made those decisions.
Wow, you were responsible for buying, but not advertising.
There would be some input,
Okay.
but that decision was not the buyer's to make.
So you can always say, "I told you," or
That doesn't go too far.
I understand.
Yeah.
So great, Bob. Thank you. Amazing. You know, I think there is so much value here. So